Hello. Good evening. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm Núria. I'm a Catalan artist. I don't speak English very well, but I'll try to do a presentation. Before opening the conference on how to expropriate money from banks, I would like to tell you is that a micro? Before opening the conference on how to expropriate money from banks, I would like to tell you a little about the project from which this conference comes. I lived in Cuba for 2 years, and when I returned to Spain in 2009, everyone was talking about the crisis, and I started studying a bit of monetary policy, and I detected the role it had in the fractional reserve system used by banks in the process of creating the credit bubble. Based on this, I conceived the project Displaced legal application number 1, fractional reserve, where I have defined a master plan which proposed to apply to banks the same law, the same system that regulates their money-generating activity, creating money as debt, as well as I won't highlight this mechanism. In order to do this, I have created various platforms to inform and educate the public how to expropriate money from banks. The first phase was to carry out an educational meeting entitled How to Expropriate Money from the Bank, and the second phase was the creation and publication of a manual containing the various expropriation strategies, legal consultation, and analytic text. At the end of the conference, who are interested can take a manual for free. Generally, this was the idea of the project, and to not extend the presentation more, welcome everyone to a conference about how to expropriate money from the banks. Today we have the presence of Sultan Pogatza, who is an international political economist working on questions related to development, public policy, the economics and politics of European integration, as well as issues related to Central Europe and the Balkans. And tonight we have Enric Duran, will also accompany us. He's a Catalan activist who expropriated 500,000 euros from various banks between 2006 and 2008. And at the end of his action, he made it public. He gave all the money raised to fund to various anti-capitalist social movements, and he is currently promoting alternative to life outside the capitalistic system, such as Cooperative Integral Catalana and FairCop. We are grateful to the speakers for the participation, and Sultan will start, and then Enric will arrive. He will talk in Spanish via Skype, and Etelka will translate it to Hungarian. I would like to thank Etelka for this, and after the speeches, we will open to the debate, to questions and discussions. Thank you very much.
What happens in a fractional reserve system is that you have the central bank printing money. That's kind of well known by everybody that the central bank prints money. Now, this money used to be covered by real value until 1973, until which time it was tied to gold. So in theory, you could have exchanged your notes, your banknotes to gold until 1973. This was ended, it was cut in 1973, so since then, in reality, when the central bank issues money, it prints money, it's not really tied to anything apart from faith in the system. So basically, it's the faith in the system which helps it operate. You cannot realistically exchange it for gold. Now, this money is then passed on to commercial banks, and what the commercial banks do is that they take deposits and they lend. And the central feature of the fractional reserve banking system, and the reason why it's called fractional, is that you don't have to cover all of your lending by having exactly the same amount of money as you lend. So obviously the business of a bank is to lend to people, help the economy by providing capital for people who want to run an enterprise, and you know, without any foresight, one would think that the normal business would be to have 100% coverage of whatever you lend by having exactly that much money in the bank. But in reality, what happens is that people put their money in a bank and then they usually don't touch it for a long period of time. So you don't have every single person coming in every single day to take all the money from the bank, and therefore it essentially never happens that everybody wants to take all their money out on exactly the same day. So the bank doesn't have to have all that money with them all the time. You can kind of tell what percentage of the money is being taken out on a daily basis. There's a kind of probability which is attached to this. So essentially what banks do is that they only hold on to a fraction of the money, a certain part of the money which is being lent out. So they don't have ready in the bank all the money which could theoretically be wanted by the depositors. They lend more than what they have as deposits. And the reason why they can do this is because of this very low likelihood that all people will want to come in on the same day and take their money. And that's why it's called a fractional reserve banking system, because you only hold you don't hold the whole amount, you hold a fraction of what happens. Now this is, in reality, you're creating money twice in the system. First of all, you create money basically almost out of thin air when you print money as the central bank. And secondarily, you create money when you're a commercial bank and you lend more than the deposits that you have at hand, the money that you can serve. The idea behind it is that because of this probability, you're able to put money into the economy, more money into the economy than you bring in. And nothing stops someone from taking this money and putting it in another bank and another bank. So therefore, at the end of the day, if you do this over and over again, you have created far more capital flowing around in the economy than what you started off with. Now, where is the risk involved? Theoretically, if you don't have a bank run is when a lot of people lose faith in a bank. And so that's when the news spread in town that this bank is collapsing. And when a bank is collapsing, at that point everybody goes to the bank and wants to take their money out because the trust, the faith in the bank is collapsed. Now then you have a problem. Because if everybody wants to take all their money out on the same day, and once again, this only happens because people lose faith in a bank. So in a normal bank, which is stable and there's no news about it, you don't have this bank run. You only have it in the case of a bank where there are news, there are gossip spreading around that there's something wrong with this bank. But then it can happen that everybody wants to take their money out on the same day. In which case you will not have all that money in the bank, in which case you have a problem because a lot of the people who have put their money in the bank cannot get it back. Now, in order to safeguard this, there have been regulations. There is something in Switzerland, in the town of Basel, a system called the Basel Bank of Banks. It's the Bank of International Settlements, which has created a system, Basel I, Basel II, Basel III. These are kinds of international agreements which regulate the banking system. Governments apply it voluntarily, and this kind of regulates certain issues related to the banking system. For instance, it regulates the amount of own capital that a bank has to have compared to deposits. So it kind of limits the availability, the opportunity of a bank to lend, because the capital to assets ratio, how much assets a bank has, is limited. There's also a limitation on liquidity. Liquidity means how much cash you have at hand. So if people come in, how much cash you want to deal out, basically money that you can quickly give away and not long-term securities which you cannot touch for a long time. So there is these regulations about banks, and because of the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, where there were a lot of banks collapsing, I mean, it is well known that wherever you come from, you might have examples of this. The big famous one is the Lehman Brothers case in the United States, but if you come from Holland or Belgium, you would be familiar with Fortis. If you come from the United Kingdom, you'd be familiar with, what was it called, Northern Rock and Royal Bank of Scotland, etc., etc. So if you come from Greece, you would know about almost all of the banking system, which basically had troubles after the haircut. Especially the big banks of Greece, Alpha Bank, Eurobank, Ethniki Trapeza, etc., etc. So in almost all of your countries, you had some, so Slovenia, a lot of banks in the Baltics. So wherever you look around, there were troubles with banks after the financial crisis. So what we have created in the meantime is for one, a European system which kind of looks at the systemic risks, so it analyzes the banking system and looks at where the risks are. Secondly, there was a tightening of the regulations, so there now needs to be much higher reserves than before. They have raised the reserves that banks have, that they need to hold. Thirdly, there is now something which is just being implemented in these years. Next year will be a big year in terms of these banking regulations. Something called European Deposit Insurance Scheme, which means that if you put money in a bank, this already exists at the national level, your money there is insured. So to a certain amount which for an ordinary person is relatively high, if a bank collapses, then your money is safe with the bank. So that's another kind of safeguard that we have against banks collapsing. So the regulation has been tightened. There is now more belief that the crisis had made banks safer than before. But of course, there are still criticisms of the system. So a lot of people believe that a system which is based on creating money which doesn't have any sort of tangible value to back it up is a problematic issue, and that still remains a debate whether we should have a system like that or not. One more thing which I think is worth mentioning is that a lot of the trouble with the financial crisis wasn't actually related to the part of the banking system which was regulated. So this is something else that you have to know, that this is, so far I've only been speaking about the part of the banking system which is regulated because these institutions are considered to be banks. But there's also a very large segment of the financial world which is known as the shadow banking system. The shadow banking system is not regulated by ordinary regulation covering banks. So you have to understand that all of what I've said so far only applies to institutions which are lawfully, legally considered banks. There are other firms which have activities which are basically financing parts of the economy which are not considered banks, and they're exempt from this whole regulation that I've been talking about. And also banks or institutions which are regulated as banks do a lot of activities which are outside, so basically shadow banking activities which are outside of the realm that is regulated as the financial system. What do we mean by a shadow banking system? Well, a shadow banking system is something that where lending is not covered by deposits. So in a traditional banking system, people put their deposits in a bank, and that is what covers the lending. In a shadow banking system, most of the lending is done through what is called securitization. And securitization basically means creating very complex financial instruments which you sell on to the public, basically. Was the American issue with the whole mortgage lending, subprime mortgage lending as it was called. So if you have ever looked at how actually Lehman Brothers collapsed and how AIG collapsed and what went on in the United States, it's a very simple story. They had been lending, well, it's not a simple story, but you can explain it in a simple way. They had been lending mortgages to people who could afford it, who they knew would be able to pay it. But after a while, the banks had to produce fantastic figures of profitability, and they started lending to people who they knew would not repay. And that's a key issue often in the modern banking system, that they actually lend to people that they know would not be able to pay back. Why doesn't the bank make a loss on these loans? Firstly, because if the people cannot repay their loans, then the bank gets their houses or homes or whatever is behind it. So the bank actually has almost no risk. Of course, the bank prefers that they pay back the mortgage. Banks like money more than houses. It's difficult to do something with a house or sheep or something like that. But in the worst case scenario, you get the bank, you get the house or you get the sheep or something, and then you have to sell it or something. Now, the second reason why banks were not at risk is because they securitized the mortgage, which means that if in 10 people, there were 3 people who were likely not to pay, and there were 7 people who were likely to pay. They put these 10 people together in one security, a kind of financial paper, which then they sold on in the markets to people who were willing to buy this. This is called diversifying the risk. And basically, you put together the bad apples with the good apples. There are more good apples than bad apples, supposedly, and you think that this is going to be okay. But the problem was that at the end of the day, the institutions which bought these securities were very, very concentrated. These were a very small handful of very large banks, and one of the other issues with banks is, and this is the last thing I want to say, but I think this is important, is that banks today are gigantic institutions. They constitute something called systemic risk. So in theory, banks were made up to serve enterprises, and they were supposed to be small enough not to constitute what is called a systemic risk. So if one bank fails, well, it's an unfortunate issue, but the whole economy doesn't collapse because of it. But the problem was that banks were becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. So you have gigantic banks like Goldman's, actually financial holding companies like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, or in Switzerland, UBS, or in Germany, Deutsche Bank, or BNP Paribas in France, or ING in Holland, or Banco Santander in Spain, or wherever you go, there are these massive big companies, which, if they fail, make the entire economy collapse. I mean, the asset value of ING is bigger than the Dutch national GDP. And the asset value of Deutsche Bank, if I remember correctly, is about 80% of Germany's asset value. So if a small part of this system collapses, then the whole bank collapses, and if the bank collapses, then the entire German or Dutch economy collapses. So basically, banks have become too big. And when Barack Obama became president of the United States, one of the first things that he said he would want to do is to break these banks up into small enough units so that each small unit would not constitute a systemic risk. So they would have to cut them up into small banks. They commissioned a study, and they said the 6 largest banks need to be broken up. Guess how many banks they would have had to break up the 6 biggest financial conglomerates in order for them not to constitute a systemic risk? 350. So the study showed that 6 banks, the 6 biggest ones, would have to be broken up into 350 banks. Now, you can imagine what happened afterwards. Basically, Obama put the whole issue on the shelf and said, well, these guys are the biggest sponsors of our election campaigns. So most of the money for our politicians actually come from, including the president, comes from JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, etc. There is no way that during my presidency I'm going to break up these very big banks into small enough banks. So nothing has been said about this anymore. I think this is a short but poignant summary of how the banking system works, how fractional reserve banking works, what the problem with banks is. I hope I was helpful and enjoy the rest of it.
We see Enric is in Skype. What they prefer?
Please put your hands up who prefer that the translation won't be in Hungarian but in English. Those who prefer. Okay, and the others don't mind, I guess, the Hungarians. Okay, so then please.
Okay. Pero dejando en español. Okay, ahora estamos esperando que Enric se conecte.
We're waiting for Enric to connect.
Enric, bueno, Enric ahora mismo está en busca de captura por el gobierno español y las autoridades de España.
Enric, for now, is being chased by the Spanish government and by the Spanish authorities.
Hace 2 años y medio que vive en la clandestinidad.
And he lives hiding since 2 years, for 2 years now.
Y entonces él ahora está como, bueno, él me ha dicho que al 20, o sea, ya hace 5 minutos, estaría en un lugar seguro donde se podría conectar sin riesgo a que lo puedan encontrar vía Skype.
And he said that within 5 minutes he will be in a safe place to connect via Skype. So we are waiting for him, and he will be safe for 20 minutes.
Sí, él ha dicho que hay 20, ya son 25, entonces ya tiene que estar a punto de conectarse.
Oh, and he should be connected already for 2 minutes now, because he said that he would be online on 20 minutes. So we're still waiting.
De mientras, bueno, os enseñaré una cosa en relación a los bancos en España.
Meanwhile, she will show us some things related to the banks and the banking system in Spain.
Y también decir que el sistema de reserva fraccionario en España era el 2%.
And the fractional reserve percentage in Spain was 2%.
Es como bien poco, ¿no? A ver si puedo.
Which is basically very little.
Yes, if I can open the. It's PowerPoint.
So Núria is explaining that in Spain, the system works in a way that the fractional reserve is at 2%, and in a case if you deposit 1,000 euros, 2%, meaning 20 euros, will be held by the bank.
Solo se quedan 20 euros y los otros 980 euros los prestan a otra persona.
And the rest of the 980 euros will be lent to other people, or to another person.
Entonces esta segunda persona también coge estos 980, va al banco, los ingresa.
And this other person receives the 980 euros and then deposits them in the bank.
Y el banco aplica el sistema de reserva fraccionaria, que son 2%, por lo tanto el banco solo se queda 16 euros guardados y presta los otros 944.
And so the bank withholds again 2%, which means around 16 euros, and then the bank basically can lend another 944 euros.
Entonces, esto es muy poquito, ¿no? Pero vemos que con 1.000 euros iniciales el banco ya ha conseguido que le deban como 980 y 960, que son casi 2.000 euros.
We see that with 1,000 euros and with lending it twice, the bank had managed to basically almost gain 2,000 euros, because first it lent 980 euros and the second time it lends 960 euros, which together almost sum up to 2,000 euros.
Y eso continúa, el banco lo va haciendo eso, ¿no?
And this goes on and on.
Entonces esto, bueno, según mi punto de vista, es como un fraude.
And from Nuria's point of view, this is a fraud.
Es un fraude por dos motivos. Uno, por apropiación indebida.
It's a fraud for two reasons, because the bank is appropriating money.
Por ejemplo, si un señor que tiene un parking para aparcar el coche,
If somebody has a parking lot where he or she parks the car,
y se dedica a alquilarlo. Mientras nosotros tenemos el coche ahí guardado, este señor se dedica a alquilar nuestro coche. No, el coche. Tú vas a un parking y dejas el coche por 5 horas. Durante estas 5 horas el señor se... No, es un ejemplo.
So her example was that if you go to a parking lot and you leave your car there, for instance, for 5 hours, the person who is guarding that parking lot will try to lend your car to other people.
Esto sería un delito.
And this obviously could be an illegal act.
Que se llama, bueno, en español se llama apropiación indebida.
Which in Spanish is called illegal appropriation.
Que es cuando, o sea, tú te especulas con algo que está bajo tu custodia, pero no es de tu propiedad.
Which basically means that you are basically dealing with something as if it were your property, whereas it is not.
Y esto es lo que hacen los bancos, ¿no? Con el sistema de reserva fraccionaria.
And this is what basically the banks are doing with their system of fractional reserve.
Y es un delito también de estafa.
And this is also cheating.
Porque te hacen devolver un dinero que ellos no tenían, sino que crearon con este propio sistema, ¿no?
Because they make you repay them a sum of money that they basically did not have, basically as the money that they had fictionally created.
Entonces, con la burbuja inmobiliaria en España, muchos de los bancos quedaron en bancarrota.
And because of the real estate situation in Spain, the banks became bankrupt.
Y lo que hizo el gobierno fue rescatar a todos estos bancos con dinero público.
And basically the government saved all the bankrupt banks with public money.
Y entonces los bancos estos, lo que se dedican, bueno, aquí no se muy bien, pero lo que se dedican es a quitar las casas de la gente que no puede pagar las hipotecas, ¿no?
And the banks are basically appropriating the houses of people who cannot pay their debts towards them.
Y utiliza la Policía Nacional.
And they make use of the National Police Force.
para quitar a la gente de sus casas, ¿no?
in order to get people out from their homes and own their homes.
Entonces, todo lo que se ve aquí, todo lo que se ve así con carteles y pancartas es un movimiento que ha salido en España que se llama los afectados por la hipoteca.
The pictures that you can see here are show the people who protest against the banks taking away the homes of people who are unable to pay their debts.
Y lo que hacen es desobediencia civil, o sea, poner el cuerpo cuando saben que van a desahuciar a alguien para evitar que la policía quite a esta gente de su casa.
And basically they're using their bodies in the form of civil disobedience in order to prevent police to dislocate people from their homes.
Y otra cosa específica del sistema español es que cuando los bancos quitan la casa a alguna familia,
And another specificity of the Spanish system is that when the bank takes ownership of the homes of people,
esta familia tiene que continuar pagando su deuda,
the families still have to keep on paying their debts,
de manera que es radicalmente una forma de exclusión, ¿no? Porque se han quedado sin casa, evidentemente no tienen trabajo y tienen una deuda de no sé cuántos miles de euros.
which is a very radical way of taking away everything they have in a situation when they have nothing, because their homes were taken away, they have no jobs, and they still have to pay back their debts.
Okay, we see. Bueno, no sé si alguien tiene alguna pregunta sobre el proyecto, porque bueno, Enric aún no ha llegado.
Because Enric did not make it yet, maybe if you have some questions, you can ask them. Meanwhile, we're waiting.
The system, how we succeed in exporting money from the bank.
Enric, ¿cómo lo dijo, no? Ok, voy contando la historia de Enric. No, but he's high. But no one is high.
Are you online?
I mean, I'm just seeing those.
We are online or no? Well, no, I'm high. No, but there are people online. He said me that in 5 minutes he had another place to connect, but I don't know. I try to explain the methodology of Enric. Ok, vale, pues vamos. Lo que Enric ya empezó a ver cómo estaba funcionando todo lo de los créditos, del sistema de reserva fraccionaria, o sea, antes que empezara la crisis, él ya previó que venía una crisis.
So Enric got into understanding how the banking system works and how the fractional reserve system works, and he already predicted, so to say, that there's going to be a crisis coming.
Entonces él ya pensó una acción para demostrar como que el sistema bancario no era riguroso y que daba créditos a cualquier persona sin saber que le iban a devolver.
So he had several actions in which he was trying to show that banks were lending money to people that they knew of they will not be able to pay them back.
Okay. Entonces, él lo que hizo fue empezar a crearse diferentes personalidades jurídicas.
So he created several legal entities.
Por ejemplo, compraba empresas que la gente vendía.
And he was buying businesses that people were selling.
Y también a su nombre.
And he was using his own name.
Y fue a los bancos a pedir créditos.
And he went to the banks to ask for credits.
Hay un sistema que tienen los bancos para saber los créditos que ha pedido cada persona.
There's a system within the banks which allows you to see the amount of credits that people had asked.
Pero entonces Enric hizo pruebas y se dio cuenta que este archivo no lo actualizaban, o sea, lo actualizaban cada 2 meses.
And during this period of time, he realized that the archive that should have registered all the lendings was not updated for already 2 months, and basically they were only updating it every second month.
Y cuando se dio cuenta de que eran cada 2, le dijo, bueno, tengo 2 meses para pedir un montón de créditos y para poder llevar a cabo la acción.
So he said that he thought that he had 2 months' time in order to ask for all the credits that he thought convenient for him.
Entonces él mismo se creaba cooperativas.
So he created no.
In English it's called
Some-
cooperatives.
Cooperatives?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Y con estas cooperativas se ponía sueldos a él mismo como que ganaba 2.000 euros al mes.
And with the credits, he basically
No, credits no, with this cooperative.
the cooperatives. He used them in order to cover for his own salary.
And he put like, he earned 2,000 euros a month.
And he,
Por ejemplo, ¿no? Él se ponía que ganaba sueldos muy altos.
and he basically created very high salaries for himself, like 2,000 euros.
Y con esto iba a los bancos, presentaba esta documentación y entonces le daban los créditos que él quería.
And then he went to all the banks, presented all the papers with him having a salary of 2,000 euros, and then he was able to get the credits he needed.
Y empezó a hacer esto con muchos bancos. Durante 2 meses pidió 58 créditos.
And he did this for 2 months, and from several banks, he managed to have a credit from 58 banks.
Por ejemplo, se compró un supercoche así que costaba como 8.000 euros así, y la misma factura que había comprado el coche lo presentó a 8 bancos diferentes, y los 8 bancos le financiaron el coche, por ejemplo, ¿no?
So he bought a car for 8,000 euros, and with the bill, with which he had proven that he had acquired a car, he presented it to 8 banks, to several banks, in order for them to pay for his car.
Y eso lo hizo con muchos bancos. Al final consiguió exactamente 492.000 euros.
So he did this with several banks, and at the end he managed to gather 492,000 euros.
Y cuando ya consiguió este dinero, lo que hizo fue declararse en bancarrota.
And when he did this, at that point he decided he would declare himself bankrupt,
Declararse insolvente.
who is unable to pay.
Y entonces ya el banco no le puede hacer nada, o sea, ya no tiene que devolver este dinero. A cambio, él está en la lista roja de la gente que debe dinero a los bancos, ¿no?
And basically he's a person now on the red list because he owes too much money to pay back to the banks.
Hizo la acción pública.
So this action has been made public.
Cuando lo terminó, él dijo, bueno, pues yo he estado durante todo este tiempo robando dinero a los bancos, he conseguido casi 500.000 euros.
So during all this time, he managed to acquire almost 500,000 euros.
Y bueno, entonces la policía lo fue a buscar.
And then he was looked by the police.
Lo encerraron a la cárcel 6 meses.
And he was in prison for 6 months.
Él declaró que él no quería, que no se escaparía del país ni nada, que él todo el dinero lo había donado a iniciativas anticapitalistas.
And he said that after 6 months, he said that he would not run away from the country, and he declared that all the money that he had lent from the banks invested or donated for these cooperatives.
Anti-capitalist project.
Oh,
Anti-capitalist projects.
When Enric is here. Well, now it's strange because I explain all. Enric? Enric? Enric, em sents?
Sí.
Ah, vale. Bueno, he fet una mica d'introducció sobre la teva acció perquè, bueno, res, perquè estaven esperant. Hi ha una noia aquí que et tradueix. Comences? Sí. No gaire bé. Ja he posat el volum aquí a tope. Ara una mica millor, veure? Parla?
¿Se veia ara?
Sí. When we can the micro. We can put this up. A veure, Enric, parla.
Hola? Déu?
But I think that we hear from the computer and not from here. Et sentim però... Ai, no. Et sentim però molt fluix.
Molt fluix.
Sí. A veure ara?
Hola?
Vale, bueno, és igual, jo crec que és aquí, The sun is from the view, no? Where is in here the place? We put a micro. Vale.
Maybe if you just translate.
Vale, Enric, si pots parlar en castellà, hi ha una noia aquí que et traduirà. Et sentim igual. Enric està en translate, no?
Que no són les 9, però pots que...
Com?
Bueno, sí, pots anar a descobrir. Hola?
Hola, vinga, va! Ja, bueno, tothom està aquí sentat esperant. Jo he explicat una mica la teva acció, però millor que expliquis tu el que vulguis, la motivació i tot. I l'economista ha explicat tot de la reserva fraccionària abans.
Bueno, pues... Hola a todos.
Hello to everyone.
Bueno, pero es que me supongo situarme así en frío porque tanto por entrar ahora como por las condiciones del lugar donde estoy.
Como que es un poco complicado ahora.
For him it's a bit complicated for now
Las condiciones de donde está.
because of the circumstances of where he is right now.
Bueno, la canción que ha introducido Núria, como sabéis, ya fue hace bastantes años, ¿no? Entre el 2005 y el 2008.
As Núria has already mentioned, what I did had occurred between 2005 and 2008.
Y fue una acción con el objetivo al mismo tiempo de reducir el sistema financiero y apoyar la construcción de alternativas, sobre todo en ese momento a escala local.
So he basically wanted to show how banking actions were illegal and wanted to make it public. And at the same time, he also wanted to create opportunities for economic alternatives at the local level.
entrar en la parte metodológica de cómo se hizo la acción, porque bueno, también forma parte de las circunstancias de cómo es la información bancaria en España, y en cada lugar podría ser un poco distinto, o que se tendría que investigar.
He's not sure whether to get into the methodology, because probably these all have different variants, and depending on the different contexts in different countries.
Pero para mí lo importante es lo que es la introspección bancaria y el sentido de dejar de obedecer el sistema que es totalmente perverso y en manos de unos pocos, y demostrar que se puede pasar a la acción.
And he wanted to reveal how perverted the banking system is, and that there's a possibility for a course to action.
Lo más importante para él es la insumisión bancaria y cómo demostrar que se pueden hacer cosas en ese sentido.
And for him, the most important thing is to show that we can show disrespect, disobedience towards the bank, and then we can do something about it.
Para mí, y bueno, ahora no sé, 6 años después, cuando la situación sigue siendo la misma en cuanto a cómo funciona el sistema bancario, pero las consecuencias son mucho más claras cuando en ese momento, ¿no? La crisis que ha sucedido es más que evidente, y su responsabilidad por parte de los bancos.
So for now, it's very obvious the consequence of the responsibility of the banking system, because we have experienced economic crisis and we can still feel its effects.
Pero aún realmente no se han creado los contrapoderes necesarios para transformar el sistema bancario desde dentro, ¿no? El poder de los bancos que arriba de la nada sigue siendo el mismo que existía entonces, aunque supuestamente han intentado controlarlo, ¿no? Pero la realidad es que el sistema bancario sigue controlando la política y controlando el mundo, y no al revés.
Even though there were attempts, or it was said that they will.
Voces evidentes están denunciando que el sistema de creación de dinero tiene que cambiar.
And nowadays we are experiencing voices even within the system who are denouncing the banking system and who say that we need to create other ways for this.
Pero lo que no hay aún, y aún parece lejos, es la fuerza política, ya sea desde fuera, desde los movimientos sociales o desde dentro, para hacerlo cambiar de verdad.
But we still lack the political strength that could bring change.
En cambio, lo que está avanzando mucho más rápido, para mí es importante, es la capacidad de la gente, de los movimientos sociales, de la red de personas y colectivos con capacidad de crear, de generar un nuevo sistema económico y bancario mejor que el actual.
And now we need to rely on the capacity of social movements in order to create networks and to create a better banking system.
Existen miles de pequeñas alternativas a nivel local, con redes sociales, con cajas cooperativas, con redes de intercambio y muchas más, que se van extendiendo y que cada vez podemos tener más capacidad de conectarlas.
there are thousands of small initiatives that thrive to change the banking system. For instance, there are cooperative boxes, and there is a wide network of exchange, and now we need to connect them all. And there is also virtual currency.
Y ahora tenemos tecnologías con las que antes no contábamos para generar ese nuevo sistema bancario con sistemas descentralizados que no necesiten un estamento central para controlarse o para poder ser manos.
And now we have very many technical resources at our disposal with which we can create a banking system that do not need central organs of control.
Sí, està traduint a l'anglès. Vols parlar com anglès? Enric?
Sí, podría.
So Enric will speak English because he just realized that I was translating into English, not into Hungarian.
Pero igual es una opción, igual para ampliar o para...
A veure, provem-ho, és que no s'ha entès. A veure, parla.
Please say something.
What I was saying is that we have now decentralized technologies to create a new banking system like the blockchain. Blockchain is a technology in what is possible.
No, Enric, ells no escolten, no et senten.
Vale.
That's better.
Ho dius?
From the top.
No.
Bueno, pues seguimos así entonces.
¿Se oye mejor ahora?
Sí.
Ah, mira, ahora ya escucha, ya puedes hablar en inglés. En inglés, Enric.
So we have now technologies that can help to build global decentralized systems that not depend on central banking. And also these systems can help to connect local alternatives like social currencies, but at the global level. For me, comparing the whites that I was talking about, the white would change inside the banking system and the white to build a new banking system, a new economic system out of the old system. I think that we are going fast in this second one, into white the old banking system obsolete and unneeded, and to perhaps the most difficult part is to extend the usefulness, to extend the participation in the new system. So but this can be changed when we continue improving these alternatives in the way that are growing fastly the last years. That all the two parts are interesting, also interesting, especially the critics and the denouncers related the banking system, yet a lot of people don't understand how is big the problem of this privilege, because in fact the creation of credit is a better way to help the productive projects to create goods for the society, and And the problem, the declaration of credit, the problem is discretion of credit is a privilege of a few that don't have the similar interest that have the whole society. Mutual credit also are going to create credit from nothing, but the difference is that everyone, in an interested way, will be able to create this credit and not a
Enric, un moment, tornarem a passar a la traducció perquè fan senyals de com que no se sent molt bé. Llavors, tu parla com vulguis, en anglès o en espanyol, però la noia ho amplificarà per al micro, ¿vale?
Vale, continuo per on estava o torno a algun?
No, més o menys deien que s'entenia.
Vale. Lo que decía es que ahora seguramente no haría otra vez la acción que hice hace 8 años, pero no la haría otra vez no porque no quiera volver a ser una desobediencia o porque no pueda ser útil, sino no la haría otra vez porque ahora quizá no es necesaria. Ahora todas las fuerzas creo que hay que emplearlas, o las que yo puedo emplear, y construir ese sistema nuevo.
He says that he wouldn't do again what he did several years ago, not because he doesn't like disobedience, but for the moment he prefers to put effort into creating new systems.
Y por esta razón ahora, estos últimos meses he estado trabajando en un proyecto que va a encaminar en ese sentido, que es Firecop, que es una cooperativa para el planeta Tierra, con el objetivo de construir un nuevo sistema económico, facilitando el trabajo en red de los movimientos de todo el mundo en ese sentido.
In the past time, he was working on a cooperative called Fair.
No, the past, no, the current, for some months ago.
Los últimos 5 meses.
In the last 5 months, he was working on a cooperative called Fair Coop, which is trying to build a new economic system and create a network that would provide its functioning.
Bueno, esta iniciativa fue presentada hace un mes y medio y desde entonces es una iniciativa pública que se puede encontrar en la página web de Firecop y estamos trabajando para que se extendiendo a todos los lugares donde sea posible.
Esta iniciativa fue presentada al Ministerio, entonces se puede encontrar en internet en la página que es Firecop y ahora mismo están trabajando para extenderla a todos los lugares posibles, ya que todo el mundo puede participar en ella.
So he was working on this Fair Coop project 1.5 months ago. He started working on this initiative called Fair Coop, and now he's working on distributing it on the internet in order for other people to be able to connect to it.
Com és la pàgina, Enric?
Firecop.
Firecop.
No, Fire.com. No sé si Fire.com.
Firecop, no?
Fire.com.
So the web page is called fair.coop. Fair.coop.
Pots fer un resum sobre el de Firecop perquè la gent entengui una mica més?
No, yo creo que es más útil que venir en la página web, o sea que no me interesará explicarlo en detalle.
Vale.
Y bueno, también decir que entre las dos acciones española catalana, que es una construir un ordenamiento regional a todos los niveles, incluido el económico, pero también muchos otros, desde donde es más fácil hacerse fuertes para luego construir también ese otro sistema a nivel global.
Entre las dos secciones, la de protección bancaria y la de Enric, que es lo que ahora se acaba de presentar, la cooperativa es a nivel global, durante este tiempo ha estado construyendo, juntamente con mucha gente, pero él fue uno de los ideólogos, la cooperativa integral catalana.
So after the actions performed with disobedience towards the ban, and with this initiative called Fair Co-op, he also created a corporation called Cooperación Integral Catalana, which means Integral Catalonian Cooperative.
Bueno, han estado como creando iniciativas tanto a nivel económico, pero también a nivel de autogestión, a muchos otros niveles, como puede ser educación, sanidad, producción, alimentación. Y Enric dice que con esta base también es como mucho más sencillo, de alguna manera, ahora ya poder desarrollar esta nueva propuesta que se hace.
So with this initiative that he started on economic level and a local level within economic initiatives, he also performed it on the level of production, for instance, of food provision, and within the educational system as well, because he considered this a good basis for fair group from which to develop further on.
Ens estan indicant, Enric, que ja tipo que hem d'acabar.
Bueno, pues acabem y pasamos a las preguntas.
Vale, a ver si algún tiene preguntas. Bueno, a ver si me puedes traducir. Bueno, al final nos hemos alargado mucho con todo lo que ha pasado a nivel tecnológico, entonces ya vamos a terminar aquí, a ver si alguien tiene pues cualquier pregunta, pues vamos a aprovechar que Enrique está en directo para hacérselas a él.
Given that the presentation got too large because of the technological difficulties, maybe we can jump to the question part, given that Enric is online now, and so you can address him.
What kind of plan he has for the future? As a
Está bien, pero lo que yo es torna señor.
De momento, mientras esta situación, pues está trabajando online, como ahora mismo, ¿no? En la tranquilidad, pero su objetivo es volver a ser libre.
So given that he is on hiding, he will carry on with his work online, but his aim is to be free.
¿Alguien más tiene preguntas?
How long is he going to have to hide? Does he know?
Yeah. Preguntan que si sabes cuánto tiempo deberías de estar escondido. ¿Hasta cuándo?
Depende de nosotros, no de ellos.
Dice, ¿muy bien están?
¿De nosotros o de ellos?
No, Enric dice que eso depende de nosotros, no de ellos.
This depends on us, not on them.
O Val, ¿no? ¿Alguien más?
Any other?
Comentario, whatever. Estamos callados.
Akkor még csak azt sem csinálja, hogy igazából nem ugyanazt csinálni, amit a bankról. Ennél se lehet
if nobody have questions or something to say or some thoughts to share, we finish. Yeah? Okay. Pues ja, Enric, no tenen preguntes, mira. Pues res, Enric, thank you very much. Ja, no? Enric, gràcies.
Vale. Bueno.
Pues res. Ja. Pues res, Enric, thank you.